Welcome everyone to our 6th workshop in our Inclusive Solarize workshop series. Today we're going to be focusing on the communication and outreach strategies, which is really getting into the meat and potatoes of this cohort. So excited to dive into a lot of this today. And as a reminder of where we've been and where we're going, we today are focusing on communications and outreach, and the next two workshops, the last two workshops, will be on selecting an installer and preparing for the campaign launch. And then we'll have some informal meetings through the summer. And also just a quick note that a couple people in our last workshop on the campaign website asked for an Excel tool to help calculate financial overview of the campaign. So we've developed that calculator and can provide that if helpful. But now let's get into the communications and outreach part today. We have two desired outcomes for participants. The first is to align on the campaign's message and then identify the campaign's messengers in order to reach marginalized residents. And our second desired outcome is to start developing an outreach strategy and those education and outreach materials. And these two outcomes is how we framed our agenda for today. So after, we'll do some quick intros and a check-in question as always, but then our first part to the workshop today is going to be on that campaign message and messengers. So Tushar is going to provide a quick presentation to frame the conversation, but the majority of the time will be an expert panel with Solar United Neighbors, Philadelphia Energy Authority, and Smart Power. And then the second main session is going to be on the campaign outreach strategy and materials. So I will provide similarly just a quick presentation to frame the conversation, but then the majority of the time will be with PosiGen and Spark Northwest in a similar panel. And each city will have about 25 minutes to work on their own worksheets that we've developed and start preparing those materials and strategies. And then we'll just have 5 minutes at the end to talk about next steps and report out.
With our focus today on campaign communication and outreach, we'll begin by discussing how to develop a campaign message and identifying campaign messengers. Now, we have a lot of experts on the call today from Solar United Neighbors, Philadelphia Energy Authority, Smart Power, PosiGen, and Spark Northwest, and we want to spend as much time as we can hearing from them. So I'm going to start us off with an outline of themes to consider as we develop our campaign message and pick messengers, and then we'll have a quick Zoom exercise from our experts to let them weigh in visually, but then we'll spend a decent amount of time just hearing from them about their insights and advice. A key way of thinking about our communication strategy is that we want to develop a campaign story that resonates with our audience and is delivered by trusted sources. So that means when we're developing our message, we start with our Solarize campaign goals and figure out who our intended audience is. What are our audience's motivations, goals? What might their priorities, barriers, reservations be? Then we craft a message. So we're trying to create a story here for why folks should join the campaign or why they would want to install solar. And then we have the right messengers conveying that story. It's probably obvious that the community partnerships we built here are key. And that's part of the reason why we've been stressing building partnerships from the beginning and having partners be decision makers. Our partnerships should really be rooted in and guiding who the audience is, what the message is, and who the sources are. And hopefully our community partnerships are also connecting us to our audience and making this less of our campaign less delivery and more dialogue. Keeping in mind that the audience frames the narrative, I'll briefly break down different elements of the message that appeal to different folks, and we'll look at the types of messengers to enlist in more detail as well. So as I mentioned, we're trying to tell a story about why folks should join the campaign. This goes back to some of the content from our preliminary workshops where we discussed different reasons that people are interested in participating in Solarize campaigns. So there are individual motivations here. For example, you can save money by joining the Solarize campaign. Or you can access easy financing to install solar panels. Or the campaign provides a streamlined, simplified process where the installer has already been vetted for quality and you just need to follow these set steps. Then there are community motivations. So, joining the campaign will spur local jobs and workforce development. Joining the campaign will help our community produce more clean energy that reduces pollution and reduces CO2 emissions. There's also the community aspect of Solarize. So joining the campaign helps you go solar with your neighbors. And that, it's an exercise in community development, builds community wealth and energy democracy. Given that we're prioritizing LMI communities, there's actually an interesting study conducted at Yale, and Brian at Smart Power can speak more to that, but it uses field data from my Solarize Connecticut campaigns, and it suggests that LMI residents are actually more likely to be responsive to both individual and community-focused motivations for joining a Solarize campaign. And while the individual motivations are, on the other hand, just the individual motivations are more persuasive for higher income residents. So I'm not sure what that says about higher income folks, but the point is, I think, that emphasizing that the campaign leads to local jobs, reduced air pollution, and community development is particularly important for our LMI campaigns. And when we're thinking about our messaging, it's also pretty important to remember that education is a big part of the campaign. So you want to figure out where your audience is at, not assume certain knowledge about solar energy, for example, that would make your outreach fall flat. So we're thinking about how do we convey our message in a way that is also educational. In our breakout sessions today, we'll be spending more time thinking through and framing our core messages. And once we've done that, then creating our communication materials really becomes kind of a matter of editing and shaping that core message to fit different outreach formats. It looks like I skipped a slide a little early, but anyways, so the next part we're talking about campaign messengers. Just as you can't separate form and content, the message and the messenger really go hand in hand. So having multiple folks spreading the word about the campaign from different angles can be useful. And there are different categories of messengers that we want to think through in our campaign. So there's city officials, folks like the mayor, other elected officials, city departments that interact with the community. Community-based organizations are definitely key. Having people who interact with and have relationships with the community and who are well-positioned to reach out and have trust already. These folks can definitely help people learn about this new Solarize opportunity. And volunteers and solar ambassadors are a central piece of Solarize campaigns as well. So finding neighbors who are part of the program and want to spread the word, or folks who've installed solar previously, can be really helpful. And I think Angela can talk more about this, but I think Solar United Neighbors is also hosting a volunteer training in early March. And then of course your Solarize team will also be spreading the word too, and many team members probably fall in these previous categories as well. The defining point here is really trust, having trust and building trust. And to get at that, there are certainly more categories of messengers, and I'm looking forward to seeing what our experts have to say and whether they have thoughts on what campaign messengers have worked well for them in the past. So that was a high-level outline of themes to think about as we frame our campaign outreach. Now we're going to, bring our, we'll work on more of this in our community breakout sessions further, but now I'm going to stop talking and begin to draw in our experts. So for our 5 panelists and experts on the call today, I want to start by getting a sense of what resonated with you based on what I just talked about. So the first question I want to ask, and just want to get some Zoom annotations for, is which campaign themes typically resonate the most with the largest number of residents, and then which campaign themes typically resonate the most with LMI residents. So yeah, if our experts can just start annotating based on what's worked for you well, that would be great. And if anyone's unfamiliar, to use the annotation feature, there's a drop-down menu at the top of your screen, right next to the element that says you're viewing the SHAR screen or something like that. It looks like we're getting a lot of responses. Looks like saving money is definitely a big one. Group discount. And then there's a spread across, building communities, supporting local jobs. Cool, and you can keep annotating there. But also the next question is, which campaign messengers are most influential in getting residents to sign up? And which campaign messengers are most influential in getting residents to sign a contract? Looks like we're getting a lot of responses. I was intending this to be just for folks who have participated in the Solarize campaign, but it looks like, I know there's a lot of experts on the call, so that's awesome. Okay, so it looks, again, like community organizations seem to be really effective messengers, peers and solar ambassadors, and then we seem to have a spread around other folks as well. All right, so that's a lot of data. Let's pivot over. So now we'll move into our expert panel. And we're actually gonna have two panels today, but in the first one that I'll be hosting, we're gonna have Angela de Monbrun on the panel, who's Chief Operating Officer at Solar United Neighbors. We'll hear from Mavish Ilyas, who's Solar Projects Coordinator at Philadelphia Energy Authority, and Brian Keene, who's President at Smart Power. So I am going to stop sharing and we can start our panel. So yeah, just to let everyone know, I will start by asking our panelists a question, but if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I can ask them as well, or we might have time at the end for folks to go off mute and just ask questions directly too. But to start, maybe if we could start with Angela, if you could start by just telling us, I think folks are pretty familiar with Sun right now, but if you want to talk a little bit about your work, and then what types of messaging themes resonated the most with the broader community and LMI community, and who are the most important messengers, that would be great.
Sure, thanks Tushar, and nice to see everyone again. The slide you actually had up earlier, Tushar, kind of really was a great visual with regard to city officials and solar ambassadors. That's what we find across the board, Solar United Neighbors, in our many co-op Solarize programs in the past. And we know they're effective, not just by the number of people that have signed up for our co-ops, but we actually ask them how they've heard about the co-op. And we know the vast majority, it's really three pronged. So of the 23,000, and I think Tushar and Ryan have this graph that they can share thereafter, 23,000 past co-op members, the top three are truly earned media. And when I say earned media, yes, that's kind of intuitive. However, we work really hard, especially with cities and local elected officials, to help us, whether it's capturing a quote or just helping us when we had in-person things. We would have like a press conference and they would be the face of the actual campaign. So they were a terrific messenger because they not only add legitimacy to the program, but they're trusted amongst all the community members. So certainly cities, as well as in tandem, solar ambassadors and community organizations that are already in the community, obviously, again, they being the face. And that was really reaching all community members. across, and we define our co-ops based on whether it's a county or a city. We work with those community partners for their guidance on how we do that, because again, they're the messengers. And so that's how we know they're the perfect messengers, as well as volunteers. So Solar United Neighbors, or whoever is the lead person that's kind of managing the project on the back end of things, is certainly not, we found, the best messenger to the community. It's the people that are already there within their respective communities.
Great, thank you. Maybe let's hear from Mavish next. Yeah, Mavish, also wanted to ask you, based on your experience, Philadelphia Energy Authority, whether, you know, what Angela said resonates with you. Have you found that there are other messages or themes or messengers that resonate the most with the community?
Thank you, Tushar. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Mavish, and I'm the Solar Projects Coordinator with the Philadelphia Energy Authority. For those of you who don't know us, we are an independent municipal agency working on energy affordability and sustainability in the city. And under our flagship campaign, known as the Philadelphia Energy Campaign, we have a goal of creating 10,000 clean energy jobs by 2026. So I primarily manage Solarize Philly, which has evolved to become the single largest Solarize initiative in the whole country. And the messaging has been really critical in scaling up the program to where it is today. So the messaging that we use for Solarize Philly is that it is a citywide initiative to help all Philadelphians go solar. So we really emphasize on the fact that this is something that all of us are doing together, and this is a program that is available and accessible to everyone. Some of the other themes that we've been using are solar means savings, solar creates jobs, go solar now. So the way we frame it is very simple, very concise. So if I'm a homeowner and I come across this message, I'm able to relate to it that, yeah, solar is something for me because it would help me save on my electric bill. Solar creates jobs, so it's helping build my community. And then go solar now. So I understand that this is something that is, there's an urgency around this. Another really important thing that I wanted to mention, and I talked about this briefly during the breakout session, is that we modified our messaging so that it aligns with the current context of COVID-19. So a really successful messaging that we've been using, especially on social media, is that solar can power us into a new normal with lower electric bills and more living wage jobs. I think it's so important to build this narrative that, solar is such an important part of the equation to rebuild the economy, and this is the new normal, right? And then some of the other examples for messaging that we've been using for low and moderate income households is that you can go solar now through the Solar Savings Grant Program, which is our special offering for LMI households. And also that, through this program, you can access financing in a way that's really easy. So just to let them know, while they're signing up for the program, that we're here to help you through the process. Solar is going to help you save. We're going to help you with the financing, and also to build in the other part of the conversation, which is that we are creating jobs and, we're training people. So, workforce development is also really important, part of what we do. Talking about the messengers, I think what Angela said totally resonates with us. The top 4 sources of our signups has been web search, press conference, like Angela mentioned, word of mouth, and social media. And I think word of mouth is such an effective strategy because people, when they hear about solar through their neighbors or through their friends, it builds confidence. Because if my neighbor went through through the Solarize program and I can see solar installed on their roof, I'm much more likely to sign up for the program and also to sign a contract. So each year what we do is we, and this is a really critical part of how we use our messengers, our solar ambassadors, is we organize solar home tours. We did this last year virtually, where people who have already gone solar talked about their experience, showed photos of their installs, their before and after utility bills. And then another really important messenger are council members. So each year when we launch a new phase for the program, we collaborate with city council members, and their social media pages are followed by thousands and thousands of Philadelphians. So that has helped us a lot. And the third important messenger, of course, is the Solarize Philly team. We've been working really closely with environmental organizations, with community groups, just to educate the masses. And another really interesting thing, it's not actually a messenger, but it goes back to the conversation that we had during the last meeting, is how you design your website. So in 2020, interestingly, the largest chunk of signups that we got is from web search, which means that maybe people are spending more time on their laptops during the lockdown and COVID-19. So when you're designing your website, make sure you also focus on web search optimization. So if someone is like searching for keywords, how to go solar in the city or solar in Philadelphia, your program shows at the top. I think that's such an important strategy. So when you're thinking about the messaging and the messengers, also think about the language that you're using on the website and also what can help you show up at the top if someone does a Google search. So yeah, and then in terms of getting a contract signed, I think the most important messenger is definitely the solar installer, because the contract is between the homeowner and the installer, and the relationship is for about 25 to 30 years, which is the lifetime of the install.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I liked how you talked about specifically adapting your message to COVID-19, and the web optimization is definitely something that I hadn't thought about before. So those are two standing points. Brian, let's move to you next. I referenced your study on different messages that work for LMI residents and higher income homeowners. So maybe do you want to talk to that a little bit? And then if there's anything based on that I talked about that resonated with you, or other kinds of messengers or messaging that you found effective, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of just to pull it back for a couple steps, you know, what we're really seeing and what we should just understand is the reason we have Solarize is because there is no trusted name, there's no trusted brand in solar. There is no Coke, there's no Pepsi. And so as a result, homeowners have to trust their friends and neighbors on who they're on these purchases. And so that's why Solarize becomes so necessary. We are connecting friends and neighbors to buy solar. And I think kind of what you're hearing is that it really can't just be any of us going into Des Moines and wagging our fingers and saying buy solar. You know, it is friends and neighbors within their social circles convincing their friends and neighbors to buy solar. And when they do, we know that that actually is really the point of interest. That actually makes it happen. And it's really magic. I mean, it's the work that we've done with Yale and NYU at Stern School of Business really shows that, in fact, we can actually increase solar penetration by 1,000% in these communities with Solarize. And that is peer-to-peer, friend-to-friend, neighbor-to-neighbor, talking about solar. And if you just think about it, it's increasingly now happening almost in other segments of the marketplace. So to the extent that, you know, watching movies on Netflix, you're more likely to watch a movie on Netflix that a friend at work suggested that you watch than from seeing it on a TV ad. You're more likely to go to a restaurant, if we could ever go to restaurants again, you're more likely to go to a restaurant that a friend or an acquaintance suggested you go to. And part of that is also because we're so inundated with marketing all the time, whether it's online or walking down the street, you're so constantly getting marketed to that when somebody you know, somebody within your social circle who you know and you trust makes a recommendation, it actually breaks through more. And so with Solarize, the game is really how do we turbocharge that so that we can actually really scale it so we can actually really make something happen. And that's what's really kind of exciting because you're seeing it happening. So, and as it relates to LMI communities, you know, this has been the holy grail. Can we actually get LMI communities to Solarize? And we're seeing that, in fact, absolutely, at the same rate that we can get other communities to do it as well. And the other thing, by the way, is not only at 1,000% increase, but you're seeing that the conversion rate from lead to contract is at about 14%, where, you know, nationally it's about 5%, 5 or 6%. So a 14% conversion rate is making solar installers, you know, quite wealthy. It makes them really have good years. So a 14% conversion rate is really an unbelievable number. In the LMI communities, the nuance that's really interesting is that on messaging, both kind of, if you say wealthy communities and LMI communities, you know, you test out the messaging saying, are you interested in buying solar, A, for your own bottom line, It helps your household. It helps your, your wallet. It's good for you and your family. There's that message. And then there's a message, are you interested in buying solar because it's good for your community? It helps the greater good. It makes your community cleaner and safer and that type of stuff. Interestingly, both communities buy at equal levels when given those messages. The real interesting piece and the real nuance here is that in the after action surveys, we see that in low to moderate income communities, the people who have bought because they're buying it for their community as opposed to just their own personal bottom line, they report feeling quote unquote happier with their purchases. And that's actually a term of art, happier. So they're happier with their solar purchase, and as a result, become better ambassadors of solar. And so we then see more solar being sold in low to moderate income communities. So where we actually thought we'd have a tougher time in LMI communities, with the proper messaging, we actually have an easier time in LMI communities. So that's just on the messaging piece. Now, obviously, there are other hiccups with LMI communities. There's the loan challenges, there's kind of financing challenges, but messaging-wise, it's really kind of a significant breakthrough. And I did put that, there's a link in the chat if you want to look at that study, and it really is quite interesting. And then I would just kind of wrap this all up in some way to say that on the website piece, it's a really important piece, which is these are on the ground outreach campaigns that must have an online component. And that becomes really the organizing piece. And we've been very lucky. We created, in partnership, we've created what we call the We Green platform that, quite frankly, anyone who's doing Solarize campaigns on this call could just use for free. And because what we saw was we were creating websites for every single city and town we were doing campaigns for, and they were charging us $10,000 a clip. But we created this platform where we could literally do 1 million websites at no cost. So if you want to use that platform, feel free to. And it simply allows the creation of micro campaigns, micro sites for every single campaign, whether it's a book club or the city of New York. You can create these Solarize campaigns online. And it becomes a real cool organizing tool with its own URL, so people can go right there. It's like, great, we're organizing, Joe's book club, and people can go there, find out if their home is good for solar. It connects directly to a solar installer who they choose, and you actually just run your Solarize campaign online and on the ground. And it's really an important piece.
Awesome. That's a really good plug, and for folks who are not working with a technical nonprofit who runs multiple campaigns, having that kind of platform might be really.
You can go bankrupt on the tech piece. It's unbelievable. It's like, because you realize every town wants to do it, and someone said earlier maybe that there is a snowball effect. Every single town has once they see it work, like, well, why can't we do that? And it's like, yeah, you can, but the messaging has to be correct and specific to that town, and that's where the web becomes really important.
Cool. And yeah, for everyone, we'll link to that web platform in the follow-up email to the workshop. So I didn't see any questions in the chat. I can ask more questions, but I want to check to see whether folks have questions. Feel free to unmute yourself if you do, or put it in the chat and I can read it out.
I just said that the web platform it's called we.green. So it's www.we.green. And also you can also email me and I'll walk you through it. And it's really, free of charge. And I can show you really how all of the data can go straight to you and all your campaigns and all that.
Sounds good.
If there isn't a question, I kind of had one, and as I was hearing Angela and Brian and Mavish's responses, because it seems like even in the responses to the question of what themes really resonate, there were 7 different themes there listed, and they all, I think, at least had like a heart or a star or something. And what are kind of the most important themes when talking to LMI residents, if you have to pick like a top 3 in a tweet or in a social media post, do you talk about saving money or pollution or jobs? What are kind of like your top 3, I would ask. So open to any of the 3 panelists.
And let me just add Christopher's question, because it's pretty related, is if you don't have, lower bills as a messaging point, then what are your next best messaging points?
Well, Angela, you want to go ahead?
Sure. The one that I noted, number 1 would be accessible financing. At least having that component, certainly if you're launching your program, having a list of available options and even leading with that with regard to your, not just from a messenger, or that becomes a big component, top one for your outreach strategy is available financing, because the first question that you would receive if there's no financing options, because I know I'll be very transparent, when we started in Florida in 2016, there's really little to no options available unless you had equity in your home. And then it was just heartbreaking, because all we have is rooftop solar policy here in Florida. We don't really have any other option, no community solar, everything else is illegal. But then to have someone say, well, how is this good for me if I don't have the upfront cost? There's no financing available. It was heartbreaking where you couldn't help. And now there's additional options available. And so starting with that message, I think, is definitely key to address those concerns. And then you can have follow-up conversations. And then there's a willingness to learn more about Solar 101 and the process of signing up and learning more and being connected to receive an individualized proposal. But I think certainly starting out initially with accessible financing, saving money, and then how it's building community through that peer-to-peer component piece.
So I'd also just, I'd hasten to add that very few Americans will raise their hand and say, yes, I am LMI or I am poor. And equally, very few will raise their hand and say, and I am the uber rich. So most Americans just identify themselves as quote unquote regular Americans. So it's not like we say, oh yeah, I am LMI. We don't know what that means, which really comes down to kind of Angela's point, which is it's really about affordability. And that was one of the big breakthroughs with car loans. And if we're seeing it with solar loans, which is the 0 down loan becomes the game changer. It doesn't really matter what the cost of the car or the solar panel is. It's actually, what can I afford each month to get this? And that's, quite frankly, it's also the same in college. Can I afford the payment to go to college? And that's what's happening. So with 0 down and then paying a monthly fee for the loan plus your utility bill, which is now lower than what your utility bill had been, that is the game changer. And so it's really exciting. Now, the challenge, of course, is that most of these loan companies are venture-backed companies. And so they have very strict FICO scores. They have very kind of strict, they don't take any risks. So there's kind of challenges there. But we're starting to see, real movement of the ability of people to move away from cost and into a question of affordability, the monthly affordable, the payment. And that's what's really opening this thing up.
Yeah, I would just quickly add, I totally agree with what Brian and Angela said. I think our most impactful messaging is definitely the savings. And regardless of which income group you come from, if you can save on your electric bill, you would, right? And then the other really impactful messaging is the local job creation, which makes people feel as if they're part of a movement that is building the community and really creating an impact. And specifically for LMI household owners, like Angela mentioned, just emphasizing on the fact that the financing is accessible and you don't need to pay anything upfront. I think that has really helped us get a huge number of signups, and all those signups then actually end up signing a contract also. So yeah, I think all of that makes perfect sense in terms of messaging.
If I can just jump in one other thing too, what we're seeing too is a lot of, I think, either number 1 or number 2 reason people are they're buying solar, and it's demographic, but they're over age 45, and their reason for buying solar is, quote, I've always wanted to buy solar. And so the various other messages of saving energy, saving money, they don't really matter. These are people who always wanted to buy solar. So now our job is actually to show them the tools are all available now for you to buy solar. There are zero down loans. The panels really work. There's a 20-year warranty, 25-year warranty. You will, like, it's all there. And by the way, it's easy to do. The solar store will come to you. You know, that Solarize is a solar store. It comes right to your house, comes right to your community. Everybody else is doing it. Why aren't you doing it? You said you always wanted to buy solar, now you can. And that's really kind of that's the demographic message who we're talking to.
All right, so it looks like we have maybe like 1.5 questions that weren't quite answered in the chat. And also Ruda would love to hear more when in the next panel on those points. So, but I'm gonna end this panel for now and we'll have maybe a micro break. And then Ryan can start the next section.
Our next main part of this workshop today is going to be really on the outreach strategy and developing those materials. So the majority of the time will be for an expert panel with PosiGen and Spark Northwest, but I'm going to start with a couple slides just to frame the conversation similar to how Tushar did as well. So one of the first steps to an outreach strategy is to identify your preferred outreach tactics. And some of these have already been brought up, but these can include things like mailers to residents, email blasts, utilizing local media and social media, canvassing certain neighborhoods, attending community events, having solar tours or live installations, and of course, the campaign workshops as well. So I'm going to step through each of these just to provide a little more insights onto each. So first on mailers, in a couple campaigns, these have really been shown to be the most effective to directly reach the widest audience. But of course, this is constrained by leadership approval and if there's the actual budget to send a mailer to all residents in the community. As far as email blasts go, these can be emails from the campaign itself to members that have already signed up to make sure that they're continuing to be engaged in the process, but potentially more importantly from partner organizations to email their own network about the opportunity. For local media, you'll of course want to identify media-worthy events to tell the media about, and then work with media outlets or reporters that you have existing relationships with, or potentially identifying new relationships. But remember that if you are able to have an elected official participate in any way in your campaign, that will automatically generate press, even by attending a virtual workshop or something like that. For social media, this has been mentioned in the previous section here of how impactful social media can be, but it really requires a social media savvy team member to lead this, so that they can feel comfortable, as well as leverage existing influencers in the community and pages that already have a lot of followers. And identifying how often the campaign will be posting and how often you'd like your partners to be posting as well. For canvassing, this could be important if in one of the first workshops you identified a couple of priority neighborhoods that you want to focus your efforts on. So you could go door to door and leave door hangers or talk to residents, put flyers on bulletin boards, put banners and signs up in those neighborhoods, et cetera, to canvass those neighborhoods. For community events, these could be things like having an information table to hand out flyers at high traffic events in areas. So things like grocery stores, barbershops, houses of worship, libraries, farmers markets, et cetera. And this, of course, is more difficult to do virtually, but there are still some possibilities to try to integrate into virtual community events or in a COVID-safe way for in-person events. For solar tours, these are tours of residents that already have solar on their homes, and solar live installations are installations that happen during the campaign and as a result of the campaign. And this helps to humanize the process, offer peer-to-peer discussions, and really just provide a lot of those interactions that Brian spoke about with talking to your neighbor about solar. And again, these virtual events will require different planning if this is virtual, but could still be an important aspect. And lastly, on these workshops, on the workshops themselves, these are essential, but we have an entire workshop dedicated to preparing for the campaign launch and the first workshop in our eighth of the and final of the cohort workshop series. So I won't get into too much of that now. So after identifying what tactics you want to use, it's helpful to determine the purpose of each of them, which team member is responsible for executing that, the timeline, and the budget for each of those tactics. So why, who, how much, and when. And it can be helpful to organize all of this into one kind of file. And luckily, the Gantt chart and our outreach playbook can help you organize this information. So after this session, we're going to have about 20 or 25 minutes for each city to have their own individual breakout and work with our outreach playbook template to start identifying the message, the messengers, and your outreach strategy. And in that file, this Gantt chart can be a helpful way to start answering those questions for each of those tactics. So lastly, after you've done all of that, it's time to actually develop the materials. And we also have a separate file, our outreach template library, that has templates for all of these. So for mailers, these could be letters or postcards to residents. For emails, these could be email templates that your campaign sends out on a recurring basis, or letting partner organizations know about, or providing them with an email template that they can send their network. For local media, this would be things like press releases and media advisories that you would want to send. For social media, the posts that your organization will want to post, as well as providing partner organizations a social media toolkit that has example posts, infographics that they can share, or photos in their posts. And then for these next three, for canvassing, community events, and solar tours and installs, for all of those, you'll want some type of one-page flyer, just with some infographics on it that are eye-catching, as well as potentially a more in-depth two-pager about the campaign overview that could provide details on the financial summary and things like that your website should also reiterate. And then for the workshops, this will be things like the run a show and presentation. And again, we'll dive into that more in our workshop in March. So just to reiterate again, our outreach template library that you'll have access to during the city breakouts includes helpful templates for all of these resources. So once you identify which tactics you want to use, hopefully these resources can be helpful to you. And my last slide here before getting into our rapid responses report outs from the panelists is on translation services. So if you're going to provide translation services, it's important to make sure it's robust throughout the whole campaign. So not just translating a couple outreach materials, but having all of them in another language, as well as having a dedicated staffer who, if there's a phone call or an email, can respond appropriately in that language, and having that fluent staffer attend all events so that if there are any questions that do come up, you can have that fluent speaker address that. And I think we'll get into a little bit more of that in our panelist Q&A. So similarly to what Tushar did, we are looking for the 5 panelists, so the 3 panelists that spoke in the last discussion, and then the 2 upcoming panelists from PosiGen and Spark Northwest, to use the Zoom annotate feature to respond to these 2 questions. So which outreach tactics are most effective in reaching the largest number of residents? And then in a similar but different vein, reaching specific low and moderate income residents. So I'll give a little bit of time here for our panelists to put their first, second, and third choice responses on the screen. All right, I'll give a little bit more time for Brian, Angela, Mavish, Jill, and Ruda to put their response on the screen. It looks like so far we have a pretty good alignment on local media being really effective for both reaching the largest number of residents and low and moderate income residents specifically. And then community events and social media being really important for reaching a lot of residents as well as mailers. And then somewhat similarly for low and moderate income residents, but perhaps less on the social media front and more on specifically canvassing or attending community events. So now we have time for about 20 or so minutes for our expert panel with PosiGen and Spark Northwest. So we have Ruta Pollard from PosiGen, the Community Marketing Residential Energy Specialist, and then Jill Eichenhorst from Spark Northwest, who is the project manager there. So I will stop sharing my screen so that we can see each other's faces and get into some of this Q&A. So first, and let me, sorry, get out of my screen here. My first question is really just any initial reactions to those two questions that we just had the panelists annotate on the screen. Jill or Ruta, it seemed like there was some pretty good alignment there, but any initial reactions on the most important tactics to think about?
Hi everyone, I'm Jill Eichenhorst from Spark Northwest, and I've been, Spark Northwest has done about 25 Solarize campaigns in Washington and Oregon. So just a bit of background there, and then more recently we've been thinking about making that an inclusive campaign with more multicultural outreach and working with community land trusts for affordable permanently affordable housing for Solarize. So I think the local media is, I think that showed up for a reason, and it's almost always our best tactic, and the only time that it's not is when we haven't been successful in getting that local media, and that is often a real drain on the campaign. It doesn't go as well then. So I would definitely prioritize that. Thankfully, I've found it to be really surprisingly easy to get the local media. The focus is actually on very small outlets for us. So it's not like where I am, and it's not the Seattle Times, it's the Issaquah Reporter. So it's like the little weekly papers often that are just really specific to that community. And sometimes it's also like a neighborhood blog. And I found that the way to get that media is really writing up a great press release that they can publish, and they often publish it word for word. They're just really understaffed small papers. You know, a lot of these outlets are just barely hanging on. So having some interesting content, they're just so eager to print it. They are less frequent often, and so you have to think about the publishing schedule of them and be a little more prepared for making that work. And it's always helpful, you know, we're coming into communities that we're not always as familiar with, so working with the local partners to find out who to contact and what information they have about that is really useful.
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, Ruta, and you had a kind of similar response in the chat about local media driving messaging and awareness. So yeah, any reflections on that?
And I was just gonna agree most wholeheartedly with Jill about local media being the most voted on for a reason. I'm Ruta, the community marketing personnel at PosiGen. I'm based in New Orleans, but we do have two other states that we operate in New York and, I'm sorry, New Jersey and Connecticut. But yeah, the insight that I have from local media is it has to be two-part, where the attention is garnered and gained from the municipal elected official, but individuals have to have somebody that is able to respond to them quickly, because when and we focus primarily on LMI customers, and honestly, if you ask, just like I think it was Brian when he said earlier, If you ask someone if they're LMI, no, they're LMI customers do not exist in America. They're just your regular American. So for us to focus exclusively on LMI, the messaging that we get is, this is available to you. This is available to everyone. It definitely saves you money, just like it saved your neighbor money. And in almost any instance where we're able to do canvassing or talk directly to an individual, we can point to another solar system and ask them, like, how long have you lived in this house? How long have you seen your neighbor with the panels? And in a very small but kind of intimate way, that connects with them to say, well, they must be doing something because they've never taken them down. And most often they, have already conversed with their neighbors about the benefits. So I don't want to say that it's an easy job for us to come back to tell them about the benefits, but everyone, like the people that we speak to, are kind of waiting for someone to invite them to the solar party. And so we spend a lot of time trying our best to invite as many people as possible. I saw that there was a point in the chat about speaking to like non-English speakers. And I will say that is always a bit of a struggle for us, but the ways that we found to resolve that is by having individuals on staff that do speak these other languages. New Orleans has a very strong like Vietnamese community here, and if if you speak any Vietnamese or heard it, like, it sounds nothing like English. And so these populations are generally kind of used to being able to converse back and forth in some broken English or some broken Vietnamese, but having a staffer who can explain to them the ins and outs builds that level of trust so succinctly that even if there is a discrepancy within the solar system or an issue, they will work like with you terribly hard to resolve that issue. And oftentimes it's an issue that could have been easily resolved were the two speakers speaking the same exact language. But they are, when you find a way to connect to them, when you find these focused and targeted ways of building that immediate level of trust, you've got a much better chance of actualizing that like that solar customer.
Thanks, Ruta. And Jill, I know that I think you have some reflections or a lot of experience in kind of the non-English speaking campaigns. Anything to add to what Ruta had mentioned?
Yes. I don't know, I would say we have a lot of experience, but we have some initial experience that I think is probably helpful for folks who may be like us or just starting to get into that. I agree. It's really, you need to have strong resources in place, throughout the campaign. And that was like the first time we did it, we were like, we're going to do a Spanish workshop. And then we're like, oh, we actually need to do like a whole Spanish program. If you're feeling like hiring a staffer, or you're not going to be able to access a staffer who speaks another language, the way that we were able to do that is by partnering with local organizations. In Yakima, which is an area where there are a lot of Spanish speakers, and this is where we first tried this, we partnered with a local organization called Nuestra Casa that they do like English classes, citizenship classes, and they also will help people navigate interacting with government agencies or banks or whatever. So really, they're actually pretty well suited to what we were doing. They were able to provide like the phone number where people could call and talk to someone in Spanish, and in addition to translating the workshop and presenting the workshop in Spanish. And then the other piece that we've done is in the Seattle area, we worked with an organization called ECOS that they actually specialize in multicultural outreach around environmental initiatives. And so they have, I think, the capacity to do about 14 languages with staff and contractors. And so there we trained up their staff about solar, so they were knowledgeable about solar in the program. And those folks actually did direct outreach we had a limited number of people that we knew their language preferences, and we had their contact information because we were working with the land trust. And so they were able to call them and really work with them at a very high touch level throughout the process. Translating the workshop, working with the installer to, make sure that they understood everything that was happening on the home. So that's how we are doing that. Oh, someone says the name that specializes in multicultural outreach is ECOS, Environmental Coalition of South Seattle. They're pretty based in Seattle area. And so they probably wouldn't be able to work with them, but I would recommend reaching out to them if you wanted to, learn more about what they do. And we really relied on the expertise of both ECOS and Nuestra Casa, and learned so much from them. We have so much more to learn from them. So if you have those organizations, I highly recommend that that's your approach. And I would say that we could even have been stronger in more, community organizations that are really plugged into those communities. And I think that's actually an overall piece that I noticed about this conversation is we're talking about like specific tactics there, but we approach it not only like what you're going to do, but like who you're going to talk to. And so when we have our first brainstorming meeting for the outreach, we have a list of like, here's potential newspapers, here's, places we should put flyers, but also here's an organization that we should reach out to. Here's somebody who, we just know is really influential in the community. So focusing on the who as well, and getting as many of those partners on your side as you can is really helpful. And so community organizations is the number one piece I would say there. And often I know that many of you, if you're a government, already have a community partner on board, but finding as many of those community organizations as you can, that you can, engage just to like get the word out and, get their advice on how to get the word out is really important.
And to that point, like one of the last things that I guess that I wanted to offer up, and I don't know if it's like a package deal, but we kind of at Posigen focus on the okayness of everyone, right? The idea or the mantra, the philosophy is around understanding that, if I'm okay, I think that you're okay, so that we can all be okay while having this discussion. And if you get into the mindset of protecting that okayness, then you'll have a pretty good guidepost around the different ways that you can talk to people, or the different ways that you can engage people when approaching them about, something that they may have been interested in, may be skeptical about, or that they haven't had the opportunity to engage with, because all of those scenarios are okay. It's okay for you to be skeptical. It's also okay for me to tell you about, the benefits of this engagement. And I've been looking for the type of philosophical phrasing to codify that, but the idea of the mantra is protecting the okayness for everybody's position.
I like that. That's a new one for me, but I like the protecting okayness mantra there. Any other question? I think that we've answered primarily the questions that are already in the chat. So if anyone has another question, feel free to put it in the chat, or unmute yourself and ask it verbally. The one thing until we have another question, Ruta, you had briefly mentioned about canvassing, and I saw one of the check marks on the screen was canvassing specifically to reach LMI neighborhoods. And I'm wondering, has PosiGen continued to do any canvassing during COVID, or how has that approach kind of changed and shifted?
So initially during COVID, all of our canvassing services were completely shut down. Understanding that New Orleans was a large hotspot in the country, we did not feel as though it was safe for us or our constituency, or anyone at all. But canvassing has since, with the opening up of society, canvassing has begun a little bit more, but in a very targeted way. Where before we would be out in neighborhoods all the time, and now we will kind of ask some of our customers, are you okay with meeting in person? Is there anyone else in your neighborhood that you would like to be available? And it's again trying to open that door of invitation, and protecting the okayness, the skeptibility of people, in these communities that we're trying to engage. Lots of our activities have, diverted much of our attention online, but we make it a point to ask the question, are you more comfortable in person or online? Because lots of the populations that we engage, may not have the ready access to the internet or web services or broadband. And if they do, they may not be the most savvy with some of the web presentations. But we have done some level of canvassing, but in a very, 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 very targeted way.
Thanks,
of course,
Ruta.
safe and secure and remote is the preferred, but
Yep.
We also try to understand the demographic.
And it looks like, Christopher, you have a question around success using one of the neighbor or neighborhood platforms for Solarize type campaigns. Christopher, do you want to just expand on that question? I'm not sure if I reiterated that accurately.
Well, and I'm kind of ignorant in this regard because I don't use any of the neighborhood platforms, but I've heard them. I can't tell you what they're actually called at the moment, but I know that some people use some sort of a neighborhood focused, almost like a social media platform to talk about neighborhood issues. So yeah, just curious about if anybody's used those. Nextdoor. Thank you.
We absolutely
All
use,
day.
we absolutely use Nextdoor. The trick there is that it's we actually usually ask our outreach volunteers to be the ones posting on Nextdoor. I know that there's also usually governments will have a special kind of account or something. So I'm never actually on Nextdoor, but we do absolutely have our neighbors posted and have the cities posted. And I think it is pretty successful. And the more people who are posting about it, the better. It's also a place where people put, can be pretty negative space, as I think people are aware of. And so it could be a place where there could be negative things being said about the campaign. So that would be also good to know about. And if you do have volunteers who can, kind of keep an eye on it and inform, that's great. I think our experience has been really positive with that. And we have seen like the real coup is when somebody who has done solar posts about their experience in a positive way. So if you could activate people to do that, that it's a way of doing that kind of word of mouth thing and kind of suggesting a way for people to actually do word of mouth, which is so hard to make happen. And that's just one of the ways that you can actually help people, give a testimonial and do word of mouth.
That's great. Yeah, I think that was the most active the chat has been in all 6 workshops by people saying Nextdoor. So that was a good question, Christopher. And it looks like Julia from Sun, you have a question on kind of gender differences. Do you want to expand on that question or unmute yourself?
Yeah, I've talked with Annie from Self about this as well. So who are the decision makers in the household around solar? Are they female, male? Does that matter? How do we craft our message or messengers around that if it does, if it's important to recognize?
I do not mind taking this one. It's actually kind of funny for me because when I initially started to recognize it, it was both elusive and completely obvious. But generally, it's women. Like females are the decision maker about the goings on around the house. Um, and the but the thing that shocked me about the level of interest when I first noticed it was always the males who seemed to want to present that they were the decision maker. So being able to discern the certain types of communication that you're receiving, but also being sensitive to understand the internal communication and protecting their levels of okayness with having that communication, right? One of the biggest oppositions that we get from like our female customers is, I don't like the way that it looks. And some of the ways that I try to get over that when I'm doing a personal presentation are, there's a lot of things that I can control about the way this conversation goes or the way that this solar system is set up. But the aesthetics of it is somewhere where I don't have that much power. But is it $10,000 ugly? Or how much money are you willing to save while engaging with this process? And very often, like the decision kind of roll around, but you allow them to make it, and don't press, just don't press. But the gender bias is definitely women making the decision about engaging. So those are my 2 cents.
I agree with that, and I also would point out that there's a pretty strong cultural component there. So if you're working with immigrant cultures, you should be aware that the gender dynamics may be a little different than you're used to. We've had a couple, and I almost hesitate to bring this up because I think it can go the wrong way, like sound like we're making assumptions about immigrant cultures as well. But so just keep that in mind. We have had a couple of situations where we've had women who were interested in the program, and they were, initially excited about it. And then they talked to a male decision maker in the household, and that male decision maker said no. And sometimes we tried to bring additional information, like in one case it was like about the roof. What is the impact on our roof? And that was the big concern. And it still didn't quite happen. So I don't really have a solution for that, but it is something good to keep in mind that sometimes, like you said, that okayness of like realizing that there may be like dynamics within the household that just need to play out. And since I brought up cultural barriers, I guess, or cultural dynamics, I also wanted to mention, I know there was a conversation about financing earlier, and one thing that has come up in our multicultural outreach is that some cultures don't do interest, and so they can't take out loans, and so if you're promising loans, it may not work for those cultures, and so if you have somebody who is your multicultural outreach person for that culture, then that's helpful for them to discuss with you and adjust their messaging. There's also potentially some opportunities for community-based financing that you could work on, and we haven't really gotten there yet, but that's something that has come up.
So a quick kind of rapid report out as we did with the panelists. So using the Zoom annotate feature to heart your first and most important answer, second using a star, and third most important using a check mark. Which themes are you most excited to use in your message? So we'll give some time for that question. The next question is, which messengers will your campaign prioritize? And then next, which outreach tactics will you prioritize? So I'll give a minute or two for everyone to think about that and put your answers on the board. Seems fairly aligned with what our panelists were discussing, with saving money and accessible financing being really important, and kind of those community benefits in the message theme, as well as, you know, the other ones being important to include for a couple of campaigns as well, with pollution, jobs, and the discount. For messengers, it seems like definitely those community organizations, city officials, and peers and solar ambassadors are key messengers that will be prioritized, as well as environmental organizations, and of course the Solarize team and installer. And tactics, it seems like definitely utilizing local media and community events, and then emails, social media, and workshops are definitely up there as well. But at least it looks like at least one answer for all of these topics. So it looks like a pretty good spread overall, but exciting to see the different types of messages, messengers, and tactics that each of your campaigns are thinking about using. All right, so the last question, which I'd like you to just share through the chat, is what are your next steps as you're thinking about finalizing your outreach plan? Or if you've already launched your campaign, what are your kind of next steps as you think about this? So I'll allow people to put their answers in the chat. But while you're doing that, I'll just move to the next slide, and Tushar, if you could clear the screen, thank you. My last slide here today is just next steps for our cohort specifically. So we'd like you to develop your campaign outreach playbook and those materials. So definitely use our templates if helpful, or whatever templates that your organization uses. And of course, really involve those community-based organizations in that process. A note that I have followed up through email with all of you is that if you're interested in a small dollar honorarium to help fund your frontline community partner to participate in this effort, please follow up with me through email with any questions on what that could look like. And then lastly, RSVP for our next workshop, which is going to be on March 3rd at the same time. And that's going to be focused on selecting an installer. So hopefully you all are already getting those RFPs out the door and starting to think about selecting an installer by early March, or at least starting to think about that process. And that's what that workshop will focus on. And with that, it looks like we ended a minute or so early, so I'll give that time back to you all, but our team will stay on for an additional half hour to answer any remaining questions. But thank you all for joining today. I think this was a really important workshop and foundational to these campaigns. So thank you very much for attending.